He walked into the police station with a confession, but the detectives weren't prepared for what came next. This is the story of Brandon Cole, a man who spent 12 years living a lie, and the truth that destroyed an entire community. In small-town America, some secrets run deeper than anyone imagines. Families harbor them for generations. Communities protect them without question. And sometimes, one person's courage to speak changes everything. Brandon Cole's confession didn't just solve a crime, it unraveled decades of deception. It exposed a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of power. And it proved that the people we trust most can be the most dangerous. Brandon grew up in Westfield, Montana, population 8,000, a mining town nestled in the Rockies. The kind of place where everyone knows your name, where your reputation is everything, where you don't ask too many questions. His father, Richard Cole, owned the local auto shop, a pillar of the community, church every Sunday, Little League coach, town council member for 20 years. Everyone loved Richard Cole. Brandon's mother, Susan, taught 3rd grade. Sweet, patient, the kind of teacher who stayed after school to help struggling students. They seemed like the perfect family. 2 kids, a nice house on Oak Street, active in the community. But behind closed doors, something was very wrong. Brandon was 14 when he first noticed the car, a black sedan parked 2 blocks from their house every Tuesday night. His father would leave around 9 p.m. Tell Susan he was going to a council meeting, but the meetings ended at 8. Brandon knew because he checked. One Tuesday, Brandon followed his father on his bike, staying far enough back not to be seen. Richard drove to an old warehouse on the edge of town, the abandoned Westfield Mining Company building. It had been closed since the 80s. Brandon watched from behind a dumpster. His father went inside. 15 minutes later, other cars arrived. The mayor, the sheriff, the high school principal, the bank president. All men Brandon recognized, all respected members of the community. They stayed inside for 2 hours. When they left, Brandon saw something. His father was carrying a briefcase. It looked heavy. Brandon never told anyone what he saw. He didn't know what it meant, and he was scared. Over the next 4 years, Brandon watched the pattern continue. Every Tuesday night, same warehouse, same men, same briefcase. He started paying attention to other things too. Families in town who suddenly had money troubles, businesses that mysteriously closed down, people who left Westfield and never came back. It all seemed connected somehow. But Brandon couldn't prove anything. When Brandon turned 18, he left for college. University of Montana in Missoula, 3 hours away from Westfield, far enough to breathe, to think clearly, to escape whatever darkness lived in that warehouse. He majored in criminal justice. Something drew him to understanding how crimes happen, how people get away with them, how truth eventually surfaces. His professors said he had a gift for investigation, an eye for detail, a mind that connected dots others missed. But Brandon kept his real motivation to himself. In his junior year, something happened. A classmate named Emily Martinez did a research project on small-town corruption. She found patterns. Mining towns in Montana had unusually high rates of mysterious business closures, property seizures, families forced to sell their homes, all legal on paper, but suspicious when you looked closer. Emily presented her findings to the class. Brandon's blood ran cold. Everything she described matched what he'd seen in Westfield. After class, he approached her, told her about the warehouse, the Tuesday meetings, the men he recognized. Emily's eyes lit up. "This is bigger than you think," she said. They started investigating together, digging through public records, property deeds, business filings, tax documents. A pattern emerged. Over the past 30 years, hundreds of families in Westfield had lost their homes, always to foreclosure, always to the same bank, First National of Westfield. The bank president was one of the men Brandon saw at the warehouse. The foreclosed properties were always sold at auction, always to a shell company called Mountain Holdings LLC. And Mountain Holdings was owned by a trust managed by Richard Cole, Brandon's father. Everything clicked into place. His father wasn't just attending meetings, he was running a criminal enterprise. The men in that warehouse were stealing from their own community, targeting vulnerable families, forcing them into impossible loans, then taking their homes when they couldn't pay. It had been happening for 3 decades, hundreds of victims, millions of dollars, all hidden behind paperwork and respectable facades. Brandon didn't know what to do. This was his father, the man who taught him to ride a bike, who came to every basketball game, who told him he was proud of him. But he was also a criminal, a predator, someone who destroyed families without remorse. Emily told him they had to report it. But to who? The sheriff was involved. The mayor was involved. Every authority figure in Westfield was compromised. They decided to go to the FBI, but they needed more evidence. Something concrete, something that couldn't be denied. Brandon made a decision. He would go home for Christmas break. He would get into that warehouse. He would find proof. December 23, 2015, Brandon drove back to Westfield. His parents welcomed him with open arms. Susan made his favorite dinner. Richard asked about school. Everything seemed normal, but Brandon could barely look at his father. On Tuesday night, Richard left for his meeting. Brandon waited 30 minutes. Then he drove to the warehouse. He parked 2 blocks away, approached on foot. The building looked abandoned, but light leaked from the windows. Brandon found a side door. It was unlocked. He slipped inside. The warehouse was mostly empty, except for one room in the back. Brandon could hear voices. He crept closer, pressed his ear to the door. His father was speaking. "We need to accelerate the timeline," Richard said. "The Johnson property, the Williams place, both should be ours by spring." Another voice. "The sheriff. What about the kids? They're asking questions." Richard laughed. "Let them ask. Nobody will believe them. We own this town." Brandon's phone buzzed. A text from Emily. "Did you get in?" He didn't respond, couldn't risk the noise, but the damage was done. The voices inside stopped. Footsteps approached the door. Brandon ran, out the side entrance, across the parking lot. Behind him, the door burst open. "Stop!" His father's voice. Brandon didn't stop. He got to his car, started the engine, peeled out. In his rearview mirror, he saw Richard standing in the street. Watching him go, Brandon drove straight to Missoula, called Emily, told her everything. The next morning, they went to the FBI field office. They laid out everything they had, the documents, the pattern, Brandon's eyewitness account. The agent listened carefully. Then he made a phone call. Within hours, a full investigation was launched. Federal agents descended on Westfield. They raided the warehouse, found filing cabinets full of evidence, fraudulent loan documents, forged signatures, records of payoffs and bribes. Everything Brandon suspected was true, and worse. The conspiracy went back 40 years. Richard's father had started it. Richard had expanded it. They had stolen over $50 million, destroyed 300 families, ruined countless lives, all while being pillars of the community. The arrests began in January. Richard Cole, the mayor, the sheriff, the bank president, 12 men in total, all charged with racketeering, fraud, conspiracy. Some faced life in prison. The trial lasted 8 months. Brandon testified against his father. It was the hardest thing he ever did, looking at Richard across the courtroom, seeing the betrayal in his eyes. But Brandon knew he was doing the right thing. The jury found all 12 men guilty. Richard Cole was sentenced to 35 years. He would die in prison. The town of Westfield was devastated, not because these men were convicted, but because the truth shattered their illusion. The people they trusted had betrayed them. For decades, Susan divorced Richard immediately. She had known something was wrong, but she never imagined the scale of it. She apologized to Brandon for not protecting him, for not seeing what was happening. Brandon forgave her. She was a victim too. The federal government seized all the stolen properties, turned them to the original families when possible, provided compensation when they couldn't. It wasn't enough to undo the damage, but it was something. Brandon graduated college in 2016, joined the FBI, specialized in financial crimes. He spent the next 8 years investigating cases like his father's, small-town corruption, schemes that prey on vulnerable people, crimes hidden behind respectable facades. He became one of the Bureau's top agents, known for his relentless pursuit of truth. Emily became an investigative journalist. She wrote a book about the Westfield case called The Warehouse. It became a bestseller, exposed similar schemes in towns across America, sparked investigations in dozens of communities. Together, they had started something, a movement to protect small towns from predators, to hold powerful people accountable, to give victims a voice. Today, Brandon is 35 years old. He still lives in Montana, still fights corruption, still honors the families his father destroyed. He hasn't spoken to Richard since the trial. His father writes letters from prison, asking for forgiveness, claiming he was trying to provide for his family. Brandon never responds, because some actions can't be forgiven, some betrayals cut too deep. Richard will die in prison, and Brandon has made peace with that. Susan remarried, a kind man, a teacher like her. They live quietly, away from Westfield. She sees Brandon every few months. They talk about everything except Richard. Some wounds never fully heal. The town of Westfield still exists. But it's different now, smaller, quieter. Many families left after the scandal. The ones who stayed are more cautious, less trusting, but also more vigilant. They learned that evil doesn't always look evil. Sometimes it coaches Little League. Sometimes it sits on the church board. Sometimes it smiles at you from across the dinner table. Brandon's story teaches us something crucial. Speaking truth is hard, especially when it means betraying your own family. But silence protects predators, and courage saves lives. If you see something wrong, say something, even if it costs you everything, even if people hate you for it, even if it breaks your heart. Because the alternative is letting evil win. And that's something Brandon Cole refused to do. If this story made you think, hit that subscribe button, because stories like these need to be told.